This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Did you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
50 years ago, a young woman named Karen Silkwood got into her car alone.
She was reportedly on her way to deliver sensitive documents to a New York Times reporter.
She never made it, and those documents she'd agreed to carry were never found.
Do you think somebody killed her?
There's no question in my mind that someone killed her that night. I think they were trying to stop her in order to get the documents.
A new investigation into the life and death of America's first nuclear whistleblower.
Listen to Radioactive, the Karen Silkwood Mystery from ABC Audio. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Laurah Norton, and this is One Strange Thing, the show where we search the nation's news archives for stories that can't quite be explained. Perhaps every generation feels like they're living at the pinnacle of technological innovation. It's natural, we suppose, when amazing new devices are appearing like magic. It might be funny now to watch those old 90s videos about surfing the World Wide Web, but back then, it felt like an adventure into unknown territory, and we were full of endless possibility. And the thing was, you could also turn off that endless possibility anytime you wanted. We didn't carry the internet around in our pockets yet. We were dialing up electric paths across cities and states and countries, and we were connecting. We knew it was the beginning of something big. And those AOL chat rooms, they hated to see us coming. Though information traveled fast back then, it was nothing like it is today. What society did have, though, besides a lot of viruses from the illegal downloading of music, were email chains and spam, and early internet conspiracies brewing just about anywhere a person could post. Message boards, web forums if you like, they were huge. Even back then, they weren't so different from a subreddit, if that helps you get the picture. Don't email us about the particulars. We're painting with wide strokes here. At least one of us was there, and unfortunately, remembers a lot of it. Now, moving on. Those early days, speeding along invisible highways, it felt like living in the future, in a way that's difficult to explain to anyone who didn't sincerely believe that the world just might end on December 31st, 1999. But when so much potential dropped in our collective laps and opened up not just the world, but the possibility of new worlds, who could really blame us? The Matrix? It felt more like a predictive documentary than just mindless entertainment. Though in retrospect, those payphones, they were probably a bad choice. Those were already on their way out. But strangers, the point of this explanation is to illustrate why there was such an interest in the future in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. It's natural, really. At great times of technological innovation, we tend to think of what will come next. For instance, Jules Verne and his bursting imagination, the 1950s in sci-fi, and the 90s in cyberpunk, but also a revival in the topic of time travel. And it wasn't just drifting around in the atmosphere of our popular entertainment. Serious discussions, they were going down. And alleged visitors from the future were, apparently, in our midst. They were even hanging around on our message boards and sending us emails. Now, it would be easy to dismiss these as silly stories, r/no-sleep posts, before such a subreddit even existed. But these supposed time travelers, they were persistent, and they interacted with a lot of people over an extended period of time. The most fascinating of these is a character called John Teeter, who popped up in 2000. So, we mentioned those web forums, right? Back in the day, a lot of websites hosted their own, with threads on just about any topic that one could want to discuss. Magazines hosted forums, and so did TV networks. Art Bell's famous paranormal radio show, Coast to Coast AM, it had very active message boards. You get the idea. Anyway, one corner of the internet was a website called the Time Travel Institute. It still exists today, which was dedicated to discussion of, yes, time travel for, quote, minds eager to debate paradoxes, share theories, and explore the edges of reality. The message boards housed at TTI attracted people interested in the future and who were pretty well versed in science. According to PCMag, the website was one of the first places that John Titor appeared, under the screen name of timetravel_0. Later on, he'd used the name John Titor on the Coast to Coast AM web forums. Now, every mainstream source we found reports John Titor's first web appearance as November 2nd, 2000, and that is indeed when his TTI account was created. The message boards are still up, so we were able to check. When this user showed up on TTI, he began to tell a story that would soon spread into other corners of the web. According to PC Magazine, John Titor, quote, claimed he was a soldier sent from 2036, the year that a computer virus wiped the world. His mission was to head back to 1975 in order to snatch and grab an IBM 5100 computer, which had the necessary equipment to fight the future virus. In between dire urgings to learn first aid and stop eating beef, mad cow was a serious threat in his reality, Titor provided a number of technical specs regarding how time travel worked, with overly complex algorithms and grainy, hard-to-make-out photos of his actual machine, end quote. Per the Telegraph, the IBM was necessary to, quote, debug aging machines still used in 2036. Now, strangers, you might say that we should dismiss the whole story based on that fact alone. And we might, except for one strange thing. Outdated technology was, and is, used to fix the issues of extremely advanced systems. In fact, according to the Telegraph, quote, in 2002, NASA had to buy outdated medical equipment on eBay just so it could scavenge their obsolete Intel 8086 chips for their booster testing machines, and even the Orion spacecraft, whose first manned flight is scheduled for the 2020s, uses computers from 2002. And those were only a few of the examples that we found. So, the argument could be made. Older technology might just save us all should we run into a problem. That is, if we're willing to go with the whole time traveler from the future story in the first place. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Did you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
How do you feel when you switch to Geico and save on your car insurance? It's like going to work on one Thursday morning and thinking to yourself, just one more day until Friday. But then somebody in the elevator says, Happy Friday! Then you check your phone quickly and discover today is actually Friday. So yes, Happy Friday, random stranger in the elevator. Happy Friday indeed. Yep, switching and saving with Geico feels just like that. Get more with Geico.
Now, as for why John Titor was mucking around in the very early 21st century, according to the Post-Bulletin, he claimed that he'd made, quote, a side trip to 2000 to pick up some family photos and to check in on family in Tampa and Rochester. He was chosen for the mission, he said, because his grandfather had been on that IBM 5100 team. According to the Telegraph, John claimed his time travel apparatus was incorporated into a car, very Back to the Future of him, but he broke from that movie and that his first vehicle of choice was a 1967 Chevrolet. He told terrifying stories of the future. Quote, A civil war in the United States had triggered limited nuclear exchange with Russia in 2015, which killed nearly 3 billion people. John wrote that in 2036, what was left of humanity was living in smaller family-centered groups, and no one was dependent on large corporations for food and necessities. But don't worry, they still had the internet. What memes were popular in 2036, though, John Teeter failed to mention. But John did apparently have time to kill in the 21st century, 5 months or so based on his posts. And he was pretty willing to answer questions on any message board that he happened upon. Whether those answers actually made sense is another matter. Posters were both intrigued, and as you might imagine, pretty skeptical. According to PC Magazine, he, quote, provided a number of technical specs regarding how time travel worked, with overly complex algorithms and grainy, hard-to-make-out photos of his actual machine, and showed off his cool, futuristic military insignia. Forum reactions, they were mixed. The posters had a lot of technical questions about using a 1967 Chevy, its acceleration, and math discussions that are so far above our heads that they are not worth bringing up here. They wanted to know about why he was taking so much time away from an apparently important mission to talk to randos on time travel message boards. They pushed for details about what the experience of time travel was like. John was, at least, happy to describe that. In one post, he wrote, "The light bending only lasts a second. It's like driving under a tunnel and being in total black. While the machine is on, everything is black. When the machine is turned off, it is the reverse effect. It appears you are driving out from under a bridge. To tell you the truth, I'm usually sleeping when the unit turns off, but yes, it does appear that the world fades in from black." Now, that is pretty interesting. However, John Teeter was grumpy when people begged him to give them, say, stock tips. And he was irritated when they asked if he was screwing with the timeline. And he was honestly pretty nonsensical when getting into the minute particulars of how all this timeline jumping affected his own life. Posters on various boards went back and forth with him from November 2000 until March 2001, until he decided that it was finally time to head home. He thanked the original forum users for helping him learn how to use email and for their questions, and then he finally wrote, "No, I do not have a secret agenda, but I have been paying a great deal of attention to your world line. My interaction with you was not a direct mission parameter, but it was a secondary mission protocol based on standing orders given to all temporal drivers. The secondary objective is basically to gather as much information about a world line based on a set of observable variables when we first arrive. Your world line met those conditions. What amazes me is why no one here wonders why Y2K didn't hit them at all. Bring a gas can with you when the car dies on the side of the road. Farewell, John." Before he said goodbye, John Teeter also offered up a number of specific predictions. According to the Post Bulletin, he, quote, hinted at something similar to a mad cow disease outbreak before the limited cases really hit the US in 2003. He said that we wouldn't find any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which we didn't in 2003. He said that China would send an astronaut into orbit, and they did in 2003. But then there's the list of things that did not happen. John predicted that the Olympics would cease after 2004, the same year that he claimed the US would enter a civil war. And by 2015, those 3 billion people, we've also seen the number quoted as 3 million, that he claimed would be dead as a result of the US-Russia conflict? No, not dead. And there was no conflict in sight. But, as the Post Bulletin pointed out, John Teeter truthers, they still argue that this can be explained away, that simply by traveling back in time, he changed world events. Maybe by hopping around in timelines, he fixed more than that irritating 2036 computing problem. Or perhaps his mere presence was enough. As John himself wrote in a post, "Simply by traveling back in time, I have created a new world line, distinct from the one in which I grew up." It is fun to imagine a time traveler showing up in a classic Chevy to argue on what was essentially early 2000s Reddit. And this story has absolutely obsessed people since then. But, as ever, there are problems with the whole thing. Now, we've already mentioned that John was inconsistent in his posts. Some of them simply didn't make sense from a scientific perspective, and that many of his predictions failed to come true. As the New Republic explained, quote, his claim that the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics was correct, and that, therefore, if something doesn't happen in one timeline, it has to have happened in at least another, is a convenient get-out clause for his incorrect predictions, many of which reflect the major events and scandals of the time, like mad cow disease. He completely misses 9/11 and the War on Terror too, which is a pretty big omission, end quote. Strangers, would any American fail to mention that? And there were other things. One major problem is that November 2nd, 2000 is likely not the first appearance of John Titor. There's decent evidence floating around on the web that this poster popped up as early as July of 1998. He wasn't using the name John Titor back then, but he might have been sending faxes to Art Bell, the host of Coast to Coast AM. Let us be clear, these were not signed. But John Titor obsessives, they have drawn connections between some of the themes, the scientific principles, and the topics raised in the faxes and the later forum posts. The faxes were read live on air, and their text has been shared all over the place. Reddit, Medium, you name it. Apparently, this 1998 faxer felt moved to contact Art Bell because he was irritated with the calls of other alleged time travelers. In part, he wrote, quote, time travel was invented in 2034. Offshoots of certain successful fusion reactor research allowed scientists at CERN to produce the world's first contained singularity engine. The basic design involves a lot of rotating singularities inside a magnetic field. By altering the speed and direction of rotation, you can travel both forward and backward in time. Time itself can be understood in terms of connected lines. When you go back in time, you travel to your original timeline. When you turn the singularity engine off, a new timeline is created due to the fact that you and your time machine are now there. Some interesting outcomes of this are, you meet yourself. I have done it often. Even taken a younger version of myself along for a few rides before returning myself to the new timeline and going back to mine. You can alter history in the new universe that you have just created. Most of the time, these changes are subtle. He then listed off some predictions, some rather dire ones, for Y2K. Largely, these didn't match up with the John Titor predictions that would later pop up on the message boards. But the most alarming one was this. He believed that a war in the Middle East would eventually destroy the timeline. That, he said, might be why, quote, there is no apparent future after 2564. Then a second fax eventually came in, urging Art Bell to preserve his program for the future, especially the episodes, quote, that concentrate on military technology and new physics theories. He also urged Art Bell to reconsider your paranoia to the Russians. They are not preparing for war with the average U.S. citizen. They are preparing for war with the U.S. government. They will eventually save this country and the lives of millions of Americans. Now, we'd argue that if these faxes were sent by the person behind the John Titor persona, and that is practically canon in the Titorverse that they were, it creates a bit of a pickle. It seems to us, at least, that this whole time travel backstory, it was being heavily workshopped between 1998 and 2000. There are other problems, too. like John Titor's stated mission in his 2000-era posts. You'll recall that it was his job to retrieve a computer from 1974, and he was very specific. He provided pictures of the machine, which he described as an IBM 5100. Much has been made of this particular model being key to humanity's survival. But, according to a post by an irritated tech head which we found on Reddit, the photos that John Titor posted were actually of an IBM 5100 Model 3, also known as a 5120, not a regular old IBM 5100. The Redditor explained that the model was portable, which was one of its key features. But, most importantly, they explained that, quote, the dates in John's story do not match. Apparently, the computer in question, quote, went on sale in 1978, not 1975, as John mentioned. The Redditor backed up this timeline of development with a number of documents, including an internal IBM memo regarding the development of the machine. It is indeed dated 1977. Other sources we found back up the release date as 1978 as well, and this puts another wrinkle in the Titor story. Still, maybe the believers could explain it away again. Time shifts, right? Little changes. But then there's the fact that an Italian TV show called Voyager conducted an investigation into the whole thing back in 2009. And according to its archived website, their private investigator could find no evidence of a John Titor ever having been born. Now, we did find evidence of a few John Titors via ancestry records, but none of them lined up with the poster's presented backstory. And our intrepid traveler would have needed to be born for this whole thing to work out. And finally, there are clues as to who might have been behind the John Titor persona, if we are to believe that he was, in fact, not a time traveler. According to the Telegraph, quote, in 2009, a report by John Houston, who runs the Hoax Hunter website, named Larry Haber, a Florida entertainment lawyer, and John Rick Haber, his computer scientist brother, as the men behind John Titor. The Post-Bulletin reported that their other brother, Maury Haber, an IT specialist, had also been accused of creating the persona. Let us be clear, all the Habers, they've denied involvement in creating John Titor. And yet, numerous outlets report that Larry Haber has made multiple appearances on Coast to Coast AM. He's gone on the show to discuss the case, of course. But that is not all. According to his official guest bio on the show's website, he's described as, quote, the attorney who represents the family of time traveler John Titor. We don't even have time to delve into that one. But suffice it to say that Larry claims he was approached around 2003 to be the lawyer and spokesperson for John's mother, a woman who's referred to as Kay. Please, don't expect any of this to have documentation or perhaps a family tree to back it up, because, you guessed it, we found nothing. So, was John Titor created by one of the computer-minded Haber brothers, and then taken on the radio talk show road by Larry, the lawyer? We certainly will not suggest that, as we prefer to remain lawsuit-free. But we can imagine someone interested in technology and time and space, playing around with ideas, having a little fun, back when it felt like the world was beginning and ending at the same time, with little idea of how big the legend would get. Really, if you spammed a few message boards about time travel, could you possibly predict that there would be books and documentaries and podcasts, and even a rock opera eventually being written about it? Imagine your teenage LiveJournal or Wattpad or archive of our own creations getting their own Wikipedia pages, and we think you might get an idea of the scale. It's terrifying, really. Actually, the idea of a creation getting away from its owner, becoming something that lasts forever on the internet, that is a kind of time travel, in and of itself, isn't it? It's certainly a form that we can wrap our heads around. After all, we are trailing our digital ephemera right this minute into your ears. What will the future think of it? Well, we don't know if we want to know. We do hope they'll leave us 5 stars, though. We hope you'll join us next time for another real-life story from the fine print of America's local papers, from the lives of regular people, just like you and me, except for one strange thing. Strangers, we've launched a Substack to tell more stories of the weird that aren't quite long enough for the podcast. Some posts are free, some are paid, but you'll need to be a subscriber to get them delivered right to your inbox. So follow the link in our show notes to sign up for a lot more content. It's like a newsletter, but more fun. One Strange Thing is an independent podcast. To support the show and to hear more of the entirely true and enticingly peculiar, you now have 3 options to enjoy 2 extra bonus episodes a month. On Apple Premium and Supercast, you can get the bonus episodes delivered to your app of choice for just $2.99. And for $2 more a month on Patreon, you'll get more fun extras. There you'll find ad-free early releases of our regular episodes, 2 full-length bonus episodes, monthly giveaways, blog posts, and occasional live streams, all for $5 a month. We hope you'll check out one of these options to support the show. There's a link in our show notes. And if you enjoy One Strange Thing, please take a moment to leave us a great rating or review on your favorite podcast app. That really helps. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Did you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
How do you feel when you switch to Geico and save on your car insurance? It's like going to work on one Thursday morning and thinking to yourself, just one more day until Friday. But then somebody in the elevator says, Happy Friday! Then you check your phone quickly and discover today is actually Friday. So yes, Happy Friday, random stranger in the elevator. Happy Friday indeed. Yep, switching and saving with Geico feels just like that. Get more with Geico.